This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
Chapter 24, The Kin, and our symbol is the Flame of Tar-Valon. Incredible, Rianne thought, watching from a window as the two strange girls vanished down the street among the tradesmen and beggars and occasional sedan chairs. She had returned to the meeting room as soon as the pair was escorted from it. She did not know what to make of them, and their persistent claims in the face of all reason were only part of her confusion. They did not perspire, Barrowan whispered at her shoulder. Yes? She would have arranged for the news to reach the Terrazin Palace in the next hour if she had not given her word, and if not for the danger. Fear bubbled in her middle, the same panic that had overtaken her after one passage through the silver arches when she went to test for accepted. Just as she had every time it had stirred in the years since, she took a fresh grip on herself. In truth, she did not realize that the fear she might run screaming again had long since conquered any possibility that she would. She prayed that those girls would abandon their insanity. She prayed that if they did not, they were caught far from Abu Dar, and either kept silent or were not believed. Precautions would have to be taken, safeguards carried out that had not been used in years. Aes Sedai were as near omnipotent as made no difference, though. That she knew in her bones. She's such a leader.
Well, what I really like about her is she is the story of the kin and why the kin should be given a chance to be brought back into the White Tower. Mm-hmm. Is the flaw, quote-unquote flaw, that sent her running and failed her test, is something she now, as a much older woman, has overcome and managed to put in its place. It's like she will never run screaming again.
No, she runs at the Golem in a couple of chapters. She runs towards the fluid man who's breaking people's necks.
The Virginia governor, Ralph Northam, he was caught with blackface in the 80s, right? This was a scandal in 2019. Oh, okay. And he kept his office and, didn't resign. And it was a big deal back then. And apparently in the last 2 years, he has gone out of his way to be one of the most progressive champions for black rights causes. And he has actually done more than almost any other politician in the history of the state to forward that cause. And there's a lot of debate about whether that was him sort of buying off versus a genuine turnaround. But whatever, the point is that, he's able to make a change based on a moment of shame. And I kind of feel like that's what Rianne is doing here as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, people can change, people can grow, and Rianne is definitely an easier story to understand than someone who's, using performative allyship to keep their office, or not. But, yeah.
Well, yeah, there is certainly some performative aspect of that, but also he's implementing real change, and people are like, well, he has the power to do it, and on what level is it no longer performative and actual real change?
Yeah, no, I mean, that there's definitely a potential for people to go, that was not good. I shall make up for it. That is a real option. The fact that most people who say they're doing that are lying through their teeth, that doesn't take away from when people actually follow through and do good work. We should give credit where credit is due and not give it where it isn't. So yeah, there's a bunch of debating about if real Aes Sedai would have allowed that situation to play out, and is the girl Amerlin a real thing, and did the tower even split, and the Red Ajah rumors, and there's just a lot of rehashing what we know from yet another group who has reason to be suspicious of the rumor mill about Aes Sedai.
I do like that Barrowan points out they didn't perspire, right? That's, I think, the smartest thing that's said there is yeah, that's a pretty big clue, because none of you know how to do that, because that's only taught to people after they achieve the shawl. So none of the folks who were sent away know how to not perspire. So that should have been an immediate clue for all of them.
Right, but at the same time, no Aes Sedai would take this shit from them.
Well, and that's why they're putting them up on a ivory pedestal, in the ivory tower, right? They think much more highly of the Aes Sedai than the Aes Sedai do of themselves.
Yeah, no, and their inability to conceive of the rebels or of a rebellion, right? And they're omnipotent, and it's just you're giving these women way more credit than they deserve. They are not demigods.
Unlike Garenia, who is absolutely, she's like, yeah, let's make another tower. Come on, let's go. Let's start recruiting wilders. Let's turn this thing over. She did not because she was a runaway.
Right, yeah, and she actually wants to challenge the status quo. She thinks of herself as being just as good as any other woman who can channel, which is like, whoa, equality, calm down.
We've got 3,000 years of making sure that's not correct. Yeah, no.
Right, yeah.
Rumors about the Red Agile and Logain, which we know were started by Suan, which is kind of, there's a lot of confirmation here where we see rumors that were started by characters we know becoming popular, like started by, not Patton Fane, Pedro Nile, thank you, and Suan, and just some, Bayar.
Right, yeah, it's like we're seeing how this plays out. We're seeing the impacts. We know what the intent was when the rumors get sent out to do their work, and now we're seeing how that actually lands hundreds, thousands of miles away.
Yeah, everything from like all Elida's proclamation, all are welcome to come back, That kind of shows everyone that the tower is split, which is, of course, the reason that it was sent out as a message.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So Garenia doesn't really know Satala Anan.
Right.
Or, but she does, right? Because isn't Garenia, she the one who ran away 7 years ago? Satala Anan recognized her as her aunt. So I think the reason she's actually pushing for her punishment is to hide her own secret.
Yeah, she's projecting. Yeah, for sure.
She's an innkeeper and she must be taught to guard her tongue. It's like, whoa. You know this was an Aes Sedai who was stilled. Remember who she is.
Yeah, and like if she was gonna betray us, she would have. We would know about it by now. She can clearly be trusted with her secrets. Like, unbunch your panties. It's fine.
We'll cautiously remind her to guard her tongue, but she was clearly mortified, right? I think that was very much, she realizes she messed up by bringing the girls there the way she did.
Yeah, and there's this line here about, like, what she knows comes from careless tongues when it was thought she could not hear and the owners were punished more than 20 years ago. Like, that's the tip of the iceberg of what she knew. I mean, technically, she would have learned more about the kin's structure than she would have as an Aes Sedai, but still, it's like, just calm down. Like, this problem, this hole has been plugged, like, decades ago. It's fine. But yeah, Garenia she's so afraid of being taken back to the tower that when she's faced with Aes Sedai for days on end, she just confesses out of sheer fright.
I love the way the single lines that we put together that really tell us how Satala Anan's story went. Everything from being stilled to being just a homeless wretch on the street, to being rescued by Jafar, to then almost dying in childbirth with his child, to being saved by the kin, and then being healed, but while she was unconscious, they spoke about the kin as an organization. Her being Aes Sedai would have immediately known what the implications of that organization were.
Right.
And then she would have, spoken up, they would have come to an agreement, and then 20 years would have passed with almost no contact between them.
Right, yeah.
Except maybe,
her other childbirth experiences, because she has several children. So maybe she looks up and is like, hey, before I die again.
Right. I'll make sure to have one of you here. Yeah. So I imagine there's some contact between them, but not super frequent, and more as an innkeeper to healers.
Right.
But there's a few people who know about the connection. And just that whole story is told through single lines, spaced chapters apart. And it's just excellent Robert Jordan storytelling that makes Satala Anan such a deep character when you really examine her. The fact that she was Aes Sedai who worked with Terran Royale, when on the surface you could be like, why is this nosy innkeeper just butting into everything? right? Like,
who does she think she is?
Who does she think she is? And that's what all of our characters think.
Yeah, but turns out if you reread it enough times, you'll figure out that, like, she knew about the kin as an Aes Sedai, and then she got a couple of clues as an innkeeper going through childbirth, and she's smart enough to have put two and two together.
But she doesn't know the whole story by any means. She thinks there's only about 50 of them. She doesn't know there's 1,000.
She thinks they take in Wilders. Like,
yeah. Like, she clearly has a few misconceptions and a few assumptions based on what she heard. No one sat down and explained everything.
But she knows more than any Aes Sedai in that she knows where to go to talk to them. No Aes Sedai would actually know Rhianna Corley is the person I need to talk to. But yeah, she definitely has a lot of misconceptions because, I mean, she's not going to dig that hard. She's not an Aes Sedai. She has no reason to dig. She just happens to have heard things and is too smart to not tally it up.
And then this, I happen to know, she thought she was doing the girls a favor, right? Like,
because Taviran. Like, all of that is because Matt Taviran, Bull of the Winds plot needs to go forward. Like, she's like, I don't even know why I'm doing this, you little shits, but I'm gonna do it anyway because Matt or whatever.
Maybe one time in a 10,000 she would have done it. Right?
Exactly.
Right? That sort of statistics. It's not something she would never have done, but highly unlikely most of the time because it was a risk.
Mm-hmm. It's a risk for everybody involved.
And so I'm assuming Taviran overcame her common sense there.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly appropriate with Matt as the Taviran in question.
Yeah. I mean, the number of times you see characters just horrified as what's coming out of their mouth, but they're going to say it anyway. And like, yeah, it's true. We see it with Loyal talking about Aerith, like...
Her ears.
Oh, man. I can't wait to see them in real life.
Oh my god, right? Elise is a badass. Another...
Why is Elise a badass?
Because she seldom requires more than a week to make a woman decide that stubbornness did not pay. Brienne's like, I'm going to send Garenia out to the farm. She needs to learn how to obey, and Elise will fix her right up. And, as we know, Elise is one of the only people that Nyneave ever is in awe of.
She's in the Cerelia, Cadswain,
Linny
category. Yeah. Old, wise women that you just don't mess with.
Yeah, they're very weak in the power, and, well, not Cadswain, but, yeah. And people for whom strength in the power is not their defining strength of personality. And then we get the news that Callie is dead, and by the power rather than her slit throat, which we saw Phalion and Ispan doing that in an earlier chapter. Right,
they killed her and then ordered her throat to be slit.
Yeah, and the toughs are like, no one's gonna believe that, and they're like, shut up, you're just men. And so now they come in with like one of the best healers in the entire world being like, yeah, no, she was killed with the power for sure. And the kin are very upset by that because it makes zero sense at all.
Yeah, but it does get resolved. I mean, they do end up capturing her and having sort of a comeuppance with Phalion.
Yeah, and part of that is like, I remember, when the kin are very reluctant to like hold Ispan as a prisoner, and Nyneave and Elaine are like, she killed your people. Get it together. She's a murderer. Those women that went missing, she's why. Please stop treating her like she's precious.
Serenia had an interesting backstory as well. She just someone who was raised from novice to accepted for political reasons because she was to please someone in the country she was in. And then she dropped out shortly after that, for unknown reasons.
Where's that from?
It might be companion stuff.
Okay.
But 50 years had not made her forget that she would have been a woman of considerable power had she been able to make herself return home to Arafel. So she's a high noble, someone with power, and the backstory is, I think according to the companion, that she was raised up to accepted for political reasons because of her connections to Arafel.
Wow, I didn't even bother to look her up. I was just like, oh, that's a fine one-line backstory. So we don't know why she was kicked out of the tower.
No.
Presumably because she was raised inappropriately and thus broke under the pressures of being unaccepted.
That would be that something happened that she wasn't ready for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Man, the Aes Sedai put so much stock in their standards and then just subvert them constantly.
All the time.
It's so hypocritical. And then, it's Sumeko. We learned that she broke down while testing for the shawl, but she survived, which is unusual. Usually failing the test for the shawl means dying.
Well, you can refuse to go through. So maybe after her first time, because you have to go through multiple times.
No,
right?
Not with the test for the shawl.
Oh, shawl, right. I'm thinking of the accepted.
Maybe she like completely broke down and like spent one of the trials like hiding in a corner, so they pulled her out.
The test for the shawl is not as dangerous as the accepted test. You're much more likely to survive that.
I feel like we get in when Nyneave comes out, she says something to the effect of failing is usually dying. Now, I think that with the accepted test, you're less likely to die. Because, there's only 3 trials, and you get a breather between. Whereas with the test for the shawl, there's 100 trials, and there's no gap between each trial. You don't come in and out. You just move through the doorway in the vision and are immediately in the next space.
And you do acquire cumulative injuries.
Yeah. And you lose your memory each time, and it's really rough. Whereas with the accepted test, like, you get at least a brief glimpse of normal reality. And then your next one. Yeah, I could see breaking down during your test, and then they can see that, like, you're not going to continue forward. And so, yes, they could leave you there until you die, or they could pull you out and say you failed. But presumably that's fairly rare.
Yeah, it's interesting to me just because, like, they control it and they're watching the whole time. It's like you would think they would pull someone out who was dying and be there to heal them.
Yeah. Again, the Eyes to Die have very contradictory statements to actions. Like, every Eyes to Die potential is so important to us. Here, go die. It's fine. We don't give a shit.
To quote Sanderson, if 10 spears go to war, 9 break. You didn't make that one stronger, you just found the one that wouldn't break.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then the Legion's asking a good question. Like, if someone were to burn themselves out in the test, could they even be retrieved? And yeah, I could see a lot of Eyes to Die burning themselves out or driving their life force into what they're doing and then dying. Like, the transition between struggling and maybe passing and then dying is like that.
Gosh, my question is, like, I feel like is Nyneave's test the only one we ever see?
We see part of Moraine's.
In New Spring?
Yeah, we see, like, the first 3 and the last one, I think, of hers.
But in the book proper, we only see Nyneave's.
Yeah, and that's really the only context we get for what it's like. But Sumeko apparently fell apart midway through hers.
And Nyneave's was exceptional in a lot of ways, right? Like, so it's hard to... It's like the only one we see is one that is not ordinary.
Right. And Sumeko is, like, she's such a stable, cheerful character, and she's a healer and all this stuff, that it's like, man, the thought that she, broke down in her test so badly that she was pulled out early and just kicked out of the tower is like, damn. But, I disagree with so much about how the Eyes to Die are trained and brought to their trials. None of it makes logistical sense if you actually wanted a strong institution full of people that aren't just completely traumatized.
I mean, it's hazing, and we can always yell Black Oddjob, but also just over time, bad policies get implemented and stay in place, and we do it because working in restaurants, man, the number of times you walk in and you're like, why exactly do you do it that way? And it's like, well, that's the way we've always done it. And you're like, can we change that? And be like, well, no, because that's the way I know how to do it. And then you're just like, well, now I guess I have to adapt to the shitty system rather than fix the shitty system. So,
It's an academic institution, not a kitchen. So how much worse is it?
People don't like to change their the way they think. That's very, very hard to get people to do.
And then there's the whole, like, well, if I suffered through this, then you do too. Like, how dare we change things to be better for the next generation? Like, if I had to go through this, everyone else needs to go through it also.
Student loan forgiveness.
That's what I was thinking of, yeah. That's definitely where I was coming from with that.
And on that note, do you want to switch over to the Nyneave's POV?
Yes, where we learn a couple of things, and that's it.
Nyneave stalked away from the small house in outrage. It was incredible. Those women did have a guild. She knew they did. Whatever they said, she was sure they knew where the bull was, too. She would have done whatever was necessary to bring them to tell her. Pretending docility before them for a few hours would have been a deal easier than putting up with Matt Cawthon for light knew how many days. I could have been as acquiescent as they wanted, she thought irritably. They'd have thought I was a pileable old slipper. I could have... That was a lie, and it did not take a foul, remembered taste to convince her. Given half a chance, she would have shaken every one of those women till they told her what she wanted to know. She would have given them an Eyes to Die till they squeaked!
I love Nyneave.
That was fun.
That was such a good delivery.
What can I say? I feel a little frustration with the kin sometimes. And so...
Yeah, no, for sure.
There's a little bit of that, like, ah!
Yeah, she's just stalking out of there, just like braid bristling, and oh yeah, no, it's so good. I love Nyneave when she's really riled up.
And yet, despite the fact they are women, and so it's easier to deal with them than Matt Cawthon. And her own guilt around kicking him in the ass.
Yeah, I love Nyneave in this scene, but I'm also just like, your frustration with Matt is so misplaced. Ugh.
Well, and I was amazed how much, like, I realized that what happened was literally when someone pointed out just how hard she kicked him and that he was limping for a couple of days. Like, I was like, oh, I always thought of that as a no big deal thing. But really, at that point on is where the antagonism started between them.
And it's mostly one-sided antagonism. Matt has moved on. Nyneave is just like wallowing in this prison of her own making. And it's just like, oh my God, grow up.
Right.
Just apologize and grow up.
She truly hated apologizing. Next paragraph. Quite literally in green. I had that highlighted.
It's so true.
She's not doing it.
She tries. She has a couple of really hilarious attempts with Elaine in this book. But yeah, she's not there
and
yet.
Matt.
Yeah. She's early on in that process, unfortunately.
And speaking of being in a prison of her own making, Elaine's sitting there thinking about some puzzle about age, and Nynaeve's like, she must hate me.
Oh my God.
Because she's just sitting there in silence, and that, like, using silence as a weapon is something Egwene talks about constantly, and that's what Nynaeve thinks is being done to her.
I love this line, like, she had admitted she was wrong, if only to herself. Elaine had no right to make her suffer this way. You're blaming her for not reading your mind.
All she's doing is literally sitting there looking out the window and spacing out.
Yeah.
And you're like, she's making me suffer.
It's that meme of the couple in bed, and it's like, I bet he's thinking about other women, and like his thought bubble was like trying to figure out like something about cars or like
Elaine and Nynaeve in bed with that meme. And Nynaeve going, I bet she's angry at me, and Elaine saying, I wonder why the kin don't age.
Yeah, because that's literally what's happening.
That's literally what's happening, yeah.
But it's, again, Nynaeve is in the wrong, so she's punishing herself.
And a clue is she's tasting something bitter on the back of her tongue, because that's how she punishes people, is by making them drink something bitter, and that's how she's punishing herself. Like, physiologically, she's actually getting the taste on the back of her throat.
Which is, appropriate, but it's still also like, Nynaeve, act like an adult.
The next 2 pages is Elaine explaining to Nynaeve how the oath rod works. We all know swearing on the oath rod gives you the ageless face. Everybody slows as you channel. Mm-hmm. I don't think we need to go over that again.
I think we all know. What's funny is that she assumes that a woman looking at her was clearly planning on eavesdropping or cutting her purse, which is just like, Nynaeve, you're projecting. She's literally a street crier trying to hawk pins and needles. She's not trying to steal from you, but whatever. And then there's this whole seamstress like subplot where Nynaeve's like noting in the back of her, like, oh, that looks like a cool like seamstress place, and Elaine's like, stop thinking about clothes. And it's just snipping. It's just like scenery sniping, sniping. And yeah, on and on. Power. And then bang! Almost getting kidnapped. It's a lot like in the tower when her and Egwene almost get attacked by the Grey Man. Like in that one, Egwene grabs Nynaeve's arm to like make her stop and talk to her, and that's why she doesn't get hit with the arrow. In this, Nynaeve is like turning away with emotion and feeling really upset, and like that's why there's just a glancing blow on her head instead of a straight ahead hit.
It's a lot like the one where Perrin turns and the arrow cuts him across the chest and embeds in his arm. Mm-hmm. Jordan likes to do this. It's like where Rand gets a crossbow shot at him and it bends down and it misses him and kills a woman.
Yeah, exactly. It's
like it's almost hard to remember which scene it is where someone gets barely missed by an arrow or a crossbow bolt because it happens so many times in these books.
Yeah, it's like a fantasy trope of plot armor.
It's a Wheel of Time trope of plot armor. Like, Jordan, I can only forgive this one with Ta'Veren so many times. Because, like, he sets it up. He's like, all it takes is one person with an arrow to kill you.
But all it takes is randomly turning away to avoid the arrow.
Right.
Duh.
Exactly. It's like, it's one of those things where it's Chekhov's gun that he never pulls. No one ever dies just randomly. No important character just dies from an arrow shot from the darkness. And it's like, you are all glass cannons. Why haven't any of you been shot? Seriously,
one of them should have been shot. It really should have happened. Like, Dobrian almost getting decapitated does not count. Mm-hmm. But this is a kidnapping attempt that goes really weirdly. I feel like they fend it off really easy. And Nynaeve is super unsuspicious of the whole thing. And it just always reads really odd to me.
I feel like it was as much trying to scam them as it was trying, it's like, hey, let's just get them to come along willingly rather than trying to physically kidnap them, because we know how that's worked in the past. And this is, and I'm pretty sure we talked about this is in chapter 18, a couple chapters ago. Phalian Boda was trying to convince Ispan that they needed to Ispan wanted to kill them. Phalian wanted to kidnap them. And they had a little argument about that. But this very much appears to be Dark Friends under the employee of Phalian trying to kidnap them.
Right. And I think that the ineffectiveness of this shows that this was just whatever the local Dark Friends for Hire were. This was not a SWAT team. This was not the Navy SEALs of Dark Friends. This was just like whatever circle was easiest to contact in this light forsaken city. And they're just comically incompetent at doing their job.
It's also first movers. These conversations just happened, right? Like, Phalian just decided to kidnap them.
Right, like a day ago? Because they just found Callie's body.
Same thing with going after Matt and Millie Skane, right? She just was commanded her Dark Friends to go after him. So very early kidnap attempts right now. And hard to get them when they're in the palace.
Right, yeah. And we talked before about how, like, the beggar who approached them on their way to the Wandering Woman probably was doing recon for this attempt. So the whole thing was slammed together in, like, a few hours. It was like, okay, go kidnap these women. Okay, you've identified them. Okay, send somebody to do whatever it is you're going to do to try to kidnap them. And it's very poorly thought out and very ineffective.
But I could see someone being like, hey, okay, instead of just trying to kidnap them, right, what I'll do is you attack them and I'll pretend to be a helper. Mm-hmm. And that way I can get them into the thing and then we have them, right? Like, I can see where someone, like, came up with that strategy.
Yeah, just some third-rate Dark Friend who has aspirations of being like Millie Skane someday. Like, yeah, these are very incompetent. But, I mean, it's a decent plan, and she does have to channel to dissuade them.
I do think they're trying to kidnap both of them.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I definitely think that this is not about getting the daughter heir or anything. This is definitely both of them.
Despite what Elaine might think.
Yeah.
She gets her skull cracked, too, when they get kidnapped for the murder all. And Nyneave, like, has to heal her. That's when Nyneave breaks her herb block.
Yeah, this is... She kind of is clearly having a little bit of a flashback to this, because she's like, oh my god, Elaine! Oh good, your head's not broken this time. She heals Elaine, and the seamstress comes out to try to be helpful, and I do think that that's just a genuine good Samaritan just trying to help, but suspicion is high, so she doesn't get to help.
Phalian is also described as a long-nosed woman, and the person who tries to get her into the car is described as a long-nosed woman.
She would have recognized her.
That's what I thought. Like, they would have known. Unless, are they using the Mask of Mirrors? They don't know about that.
I don't think they know about that. And they would have used the power to, like, shield them. Right.
Yeah, no, it's just, I was like, who could this woman be? And I looked at Phalian and I was like, oh, and I was like, the description's kind of the same. It's just Jordan running out of descriptions and using everyone's nose.
Yeah.
You know, who doesn't have a big nose in the Wheel of Time, right?
Only the powerful, pretty main character people, because this is actually the CW, so everyone has to be pretty.
Oh my god, is nose size inversely proportional to power size?
Well, in that case, Sen Bui should be the Dragon Reborn.
No, inverse.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, so Rand just has a little button nose. Nyneave discovers that thanking people is not a terrible thing to do. It seemed to come easier the more you said it. She was not sure she liked that. Nyneave, you're the wisdom. You were supposed to be a paragon of etiquette and virtue and decent manners and keeping people in line. You need to understand that apologies and gratitude are not weaknesses.
Well, she only knows how to bully people in the line. There's no leading by example in her mind. And so she doesn't, and that's a problem with the kin, right? She just tries to keep bullying them into line instead of leading by example. So. It's true. God forbid Nyneave ever became the ambulance.
Oh my god. Ew. Oh, no. That would be like some Sorella Bagand shit. Like, no. Don't do that. So yeah, Elaine suggests that maybe Teslin and Jolene are the ones trying to kidnap them, and Nyneave is like, it's Rihanna, and it's just like, okay, the simple explanation is Dark Friends. That's literally the simplest explanation.
It's always Dark Friends.
Why are clearly people are trying to kidnap us because they're jealous of? No, no, it's dark friendery. This should have been their alert that there were dark friends who knew them in the city. Maybe there's some Black Aja in the city. Like, why would you think that legitimate Aes Sedai or this woman who you literally just stalked away from have already organized kidnapping? Like, what would Tessa and Angeline even do?
Maybe don't travel openly in a boat that anyone can see from anywhere.
Seriously, this should have been the clue. Like, people are recognizing you and are taking offensive action. Like, yes, please, go waltz onto a boat.
Yeah, there's a Forsaken in the wild who doesn't like you. You know that. You have people who are coming after you who are clearly dark friends at the command of Forsaken. 2 and 2 make 6?
Definitely. Yeah. What? There's so many clues pointing at the fact that they should be being circumspect. They should be allowing Matt to guard them. They should be not going on boats.
The arrogance of the Aes Sedai. They've taken it in through osmosis. They have the arrogance that is not healthy.
Yeah, we're better than other people. I can be betterer than the betterers. No, this is a losing game, Nyneave. Stop it.
Once it became clear that the power was being used, and folks suddenly leaping about and yelling for no visible cause made it clear enough to most. They hurried elsewhere.
Yeah. No, I mean, for sure, you gather to see a brawl and then suddenly supernatural powers are involved. You're like, actually, I'm good. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm out. But to me, that's very much like what we're gonna see. Mostly, the magic in the show is going to be the effects like that. Like, it'll be clear enough to us the power is being used, right? We'll see the effects of it mostly, but occasionally the weaves we'll see POV stuff and see the weaves and CGI.
Yeah, it'll also be a lot easier on the CGI budget if they just give us a couple of really epic POVs and then say, okay, your Imagine can do the heavy lifting for the rest of the scenes.
It would be kind of interesting to do some POV where you sort of like, as they're learning to channel, they see like faint lines and they're like, wait, what is that?
That would be super cool. I really hope we get some like good world building on that. Like, here's how it works and it goes slowly, and then here's how it works when it goes fast, and like then you just have that in your head and you can infer when someone jumps in the air and squeals like a stuck pig, like what that must have been like.
Any idea who is this seamstress? Anybody I want her to be?
No, I don't. I think she's literally just a seamstress because they're moving through a city and there are businesses.
Fair enough, Jordan. Fair enough.
It is allowed for characters to I mean, she doesn't have a name, so there's no backstory.
But they're suspicious just because they're worried about,
Yeah, no, for sure. And that came from a seamstress. I mean, like, there's good reasons to be suspicious, but no, this woman is literally just like being a good Samaritan. Well, not even a good Samaritan, just being a decent person.
Right. But how many layers to this conspiracy are there?
Well, not as many as there are layers of lace on her heaving bosom.
Bosom alert.
Yeah. Lacy bosoms. Yay.
I wonder how much this crying over the gray hairs has to do with the trauma of almost being kidnapped.
That plus the attempt to get away from her obligations to Matt and being backed into a corner on it. It's presented as only being about the gray hairs, but it's the thing where you blow up at the littlest thing because you're carrying so much on your back. Like that's what this is. I mean, granted, the whole authority gray hair thing is something she's been on for a while, but there's a lot to be upset about.
I was thinking, like, okay, how old are you before you get your first gray hairs? 40-ish? 35, maybe?
Yeah, at least 40, I think. Because there's the whole discussion about Ellen Worrell being, like, young.
Right, but, just on general, how old are people when they get their first gray hairs? I mean, some people are certainly younger, but I've gotten a few gray ones in my beard in my 30s.
Yeah, no, Brandon's definitely getting some salt in his pepper, and he's in his 30s.
So, let's say 35 before they really have their first gray hairs. Their lifespan is probably extended by 6x, maybe even 8x. So, 35 times 6.
I'm not doing that kind of math in my head.
Okay, let's say 40 times 6. That's 240. Chop off. They're going to have to be about 200 years old before they get their first gray hairs. It's gonna be a while.
I need you're gonna want to work on just acting like an adult and not like a spoiled child. That will do your standing much more than waiting for gray hairs. And then you'll be like Jolene and be a child at 200 still. Like, Jolene's not going gray yet, and she's a complete fucking child.
Now, the ageless face might help when they do get that.
Don't cry, Nyneave. Matt can't possibly be that bad.
He'll find it for us in a few days.
Nyneave only cried harder.
Oh, harder. Yeah, it's such a great way to end that chapter.
I mean, it's a mood, like, when everything's piled up and then one more thing goes wrong. It's like, the world is over, so I'm just gonna drown it with tears and give myself a headache. That's the logical recourse at this point.
I'm enjoying doing these fun little chapters, but that was definitely a shorty.
58 minutes.
Are we getting
We did it in under an hour.
Wait. We have to... oh, man. We're going to have to turn it off before we get to an hour.
We can bullshit for 2 more minutes, I'm sure. But yeah, no, it's good to have shorter chapters occasionally. I'm glad to know we can do shorter chapters.
Dude, Jordan has not been writing them short these days. There's also a difference, right? The page count is about the same in these books as in the other books. Maybe a little less. But there's only 35 chapters, 40 chapters in this whole book?
Yeah, I mean, we're only going to go through, mid-August, so yeah.
Yeah. Other books had 56, There's the chapters are getting longer because there's fewer chapters for the same number of pages. Mm-hmm. And the cast is expanding.
Yeah. But also we can have these chapters where it's like, we've gone over this territory and backstory and world building, world filling so much that it's like, yes, that discussion we had literally 2 episodes ago. Refer to that, moving on. Some of the chapters they have more of an impact on a first through third read. And it just, by the time you get up to your 17th read, it's just like...
Well, what's interesting is I noticed about all the books that are the slog all have fewer chapters, right? Once you get to book 11, the chapter count starts going back up again. And so, because we do 1 episode per chapter, there'll also be fewer episodes on those books.
But they'll be longer, so...
But they will be, that's something we can work on.
Basements. Right, basements. You're going to be a nerd in the basement. That's where we started.
Yes, yeah, so I'm excited to move. I am moving in the upcoming month, so there may be some disruption to the schedule, hopefully not, just because there is overlap between my 2 places. So I shouldn't have any problem moving from one to the other, and there's already internet set up at the other one, so it should just be a pretty swift move. There may be some awkwardness with sound quality, but I'm excited because it's going to be back in the basement, and it's going to be a nice dry... I have my own, basically a walk-in closet that I'm going to convert into a studio.
Then we can at least have one nerd in a basement on this team. I think we might try to build like a root cellar maybe, but I don't think I'm going to record from a root cellar.
Well, you were saying it's too damp there to really have a basement.
Yeah, it's very clayey soil, so it doesn't drain very well. I don't think that building a basement is likely to make sense for us. I'm a Disney princess living out in a magical wonderland. It's pretty cool, even if it doesn't have the greatest sound quality inherent to it. I can make better sound quality in this room if I just put more effort into it. Buy more acoustic foam, which I will probably eventually someday. Oh, that reminds me, a while back, OB Thunder sent me a link for some acoustic foam that was on sale, through Instagram or something, and I just let that ball lie on the court floor, and it's undoubtedly dead by now. So I'm sorry, Ken. I'm sorry. It was a really nice thought. I was just lazy.
I saw the foam and I was like, I have no space or room. I don't really have a place to hang it at this point. Maybe in this next space I will be doing some soundproofing. But really, I mean, the space itself is pretty soundproof, and we'll see how echoey it is in there, but I think there's going to be enough stuff that it shouldn't be a problem.
Not having the industrial fans should be a pretty big plus.
Should be a big plus, yeah. Yeah, I really overlooked that when I moved into this place. It's amazing when you don't look out the windows what you miss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything I edit with you, there's always that little background thing. I can't hear it, but I can see it in the WAV file. That it's just there's a thing in the background, whether or not I can pick it up with my ears.
And I can hear it, and generally what I do is I run my file through a noise removal software, which does pretty much get rid of the fan noise, but it also leaves my voice just a little tinny. It removes a frequency of my voice that I'm not. It makes me sound a little different and lowers the sound quality a little bit. So it's a trade-off. Either there's going to be background noise or I'm going to lose a little bit of quality. And I think, most people are listening to podcasts. Once I encode it at 64K and send it out, you lose a lot of that quality anyway. So I'm not too concerned about it, right? Like I've got a high quality encoding, but there's only so much quality that goes out anyway. So I try and do everything I can before that final encoding to maintain the quality, and then just downgrade the fuck out of it before I send it to people, because I want the smallest file possible to get to you folks that still sounds good.
Yeah, and given that you're probably listening to it on like headphones on the bus or something, it's
right.
not exactly a studio recording of like symphony music or anything like that.
We did have a lot more timbre noise. He's gotten quieter in his old age. He used to be a lot more like demanding of attention. Now he's happy to just sort of sleep at my feet and watch me record. We're missing out on a lot of timbre noises just because he's 6 now, guys.
Aww.
He was 2 when the podcast started, and he's 6 now. So,
wow. Maybe at some point I'll end up with a fur friend that can make annoying noises on the podcast.
I think you need a kitten.
Oh, God, a kitten. There was a time once when my mom had a cat, and that cat had a litter of kittens, and we kept the entire litter. And the 6 of them were the cutest little babies. And they all died of natural causes from living in the woods.
Yeah, that's why outdoor cats aren't the greatest.
I mean, most of them lived to be at least 6. I mean, like, they were fine. Actually, one of them technically lived long enough to get taken away and live somewhere else and died of old age properly. But yeah, the asshole calicos were the first to get picked off once they started to slow down just a little bit, because those big white patches.
What picks them off?
Cougars, mainly. Yeah, bigger cats eating littler cats. That's the big hazard out here. I've even heard that there's like a cat shortage in this area because the cougars are doing so well. And that's rough. But yeah, having 6 kittens and then just keeping them through their adulthood was a really nifty childhood experience to have, for sure. And they were like all siblings, so they had a very unique interaction. Most cats, they hate each other because they don't know each other. But then these 6, like, they always had known each other, and they had a very different like social dynamic. Some of them hated each other more than others because siblings. But
I love all my siblings equally.
I've actually been reading True Hallucinations by Terence McKenna, which is awesome. It's a wild ride. I highly recommend. If you're interested in the McKennas at all, definitely read True Hallucinations. Dude is a hell of a writer, and it's a really weird story. But at the end, he's wrapping up all of his psychedelic maunderings, and he talks about time being like an object, much like space. And it was written in the early 90s, and it's been nothing that he says in that chapter remotely is contradicted by all the advances in cosmology and quantum physics and wibbly wobbly timey wimey science since. And it's wild that he's making a lot of suppositions and leaps about how time works that like hold up. Like, he's making inductive leaps, and it's like, yeah, science kind of is catching up with Terence McKenna. It's pretty wild.
What was the book series called again?
It's just one book. It's called True Hallucinations, and it's being an account of the author's adventures in the Devil's Paradise. So basically, Terence and Dennis McKenna went to the Amazon as 20-somethings, got high as balls, thought that they had brought about the apocalypse with their minds, and then spent the next several decades, this happened in the 70s, and then spent the next several decades trying to prove that they had in fact melted reality with their minds and the apocalypse was coming. And they wrote several books as a result of that. But this book is a narrative adventure story of what happened. Not the conclusions that they drew from it, not the weird time wave stuff. It's just the actual what happened. And Terence McKenna is an amazing writer. So it's a wild story. If you care about the history of the psychedelic revolution at all, really good, just foundational book. And it's like probably 300 pages or so. Like it's been very fun to read. But his ideas about time are wild.
Can that even be called a book? Only 300 pages? I don't know. That's like a pamphlet.
It's dense as fuck, okay? Dude has like a huge vocabulary. He's read way too many things to draw together. Like, I don't understand half of what I'm reading sometimes because I'm just like, I don't understand that reference at all.
I'm so prejudiced towards mass series that I'm like, wait, a small book? What is this thing?
It's also a true story rather than fiction, even though some of it feels like fiction. It is his attempt at telling the story as true to life as it actually was. Whereas like books like The Invisible Landscape or Food of the Gods are more imaginative. This is his attempt at actually saying, here is what happened day to day when I got set on this path. And yeah, really fun book. But time is an object, just like space.
And in a lot of ways, space-time is an object. They can't really be separated, you know? There's this one four-dimensional object that has always existed and will always exist. And that you can kind of experience from the external. Anyway, that's
that's exactly the point of the chapter that I was reading last night.
Yeah, I mean, that's some Einstein, space-time physics. There's some weirdness. I look at quantum physics now, and I'm like, there's all these weird... Space is kind of digitized in a way. Like, you get down to a Planck length.
Yeah.
Or Planck time. Like, that's it. You can't get smaller than that, or else you create little black holes.
No, it's good stuff. Everyone should attempt to get their brain broken by these concepts at least once.
Because it's the limit of human understanding at this point. The smartest people have looked at these questions and looked at and done the best thinking they can, and they're like, there's just logical problems here, and we don't know how to fix it.
Quantum foam has free will. It makes no sense.
It doesn't make sense, and it does. It makes you the more you're like, oh, I'm super into science and everything and numbers and math and all that kind of stuff. But then you're like, but at some level, there's we don't understand what's going on.
It all breaks. Nothing makes sense.
It all breaks.
If you go down to the smallest units, it's just like this. How does this turn into reality? No, nobody knows. The best and brightest minds have been losing sleep over this for decades.
It goes right along with, wait, how did life actually start? Like, how did these inorganic molecules start self-reproducing? And we kind of think we know what happened, but, like, there's a couple of steps in there that we're just like, it happened once, yay.
Same with the Big Bang. It's like we can run the math back with no problems until you get to simply accepting that all of space and time and matter came from a infinitely small point. And that's where the math goes, and there's nothing wrong with the math up until that point, and then it just hurts.
Well, and that point was everywhere, too. Like, there's also that misconception, like, it wasn't a Big Bang from a single point. Like,
all of space and time was in that point. All of everywhere was then.
It's still expanding, yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful, but it hurts.
It hurts. So anyway, if you're done tripping with us, we have entered Teleron Riyadh. But let's return back to the dream of the Wheel of Time. By the way, how great is it that the Wheel of Time is called a dream? And in a lot of ways, because it's a book that we are imagining, it very much is a dream that the Aiel wake from.
Yeah. Every time you close the book, the Aiel wake from the dream.
It is inevitable.
Yes, but let us stare at our tattooed pieces of dead trees and hallucinate together.
So I think part of the reason that we're going a little off kilter on this chapter, it is a shorty with a relatively low number of plot points. I think we both agree we can get through this one pretty quickly. Look at your timestamp and laugh at us.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?